You will come across Methodist churches in many different countries around the world.
In Hong Kong, for instance, where the total church membership is over 8,000.
Or in the German Democratic Republic, where the Methodist community numbers 29,000. There are Methodist hospitals, old people's homes, and a theological college. The church in Erfurt is one of particular historical interest.
Or in Poland, where the numbers are small, but where a Methodist college for English language studies has 5,000 students. This young minister is standing in front of the college building, which also contains the Warsaw Central Church.
In the USA, the United Methodist Church is one of the largest churches, with outreach to the countries of South America and many other parts of the world.
In Canada, Australia and India, the Methodist Church has joined with other churches to form union churches.
It all began in Epworth, Lincolnshire, where Samuel Wesley was the rector for 39 years, and with his wife Susanna presided over a large family. John was the 15th child, born in 1703. When he was 5 years old, he nearly perished when the rectory caught fire. He later described himself as a brand plucked from the burning. Prints of this original painting were to be found in many church vestries in the 19th century, and still are here and there today. Charles Wesley, who was 4 years younger than John, was a baby at the time of the fire. Both John and Charles, like their father, were eventually ordained into the ministry of the Anglican Church, and at Oxford they used to meet, informally with others, in what was called the Holy Club. Here's another well-known print often seen in church vestries. They were a very serious group, and because they did everything in a methodical way, were nicknamed Methodists. Sailing on the Simmons in October 1735, both the brothers spent some time in North America. Here Charles is seen preaching to the Indians. John returned, sadly disillusioned.
I left my native country in order to teach the Georgian Indians the nature of Christianity. But what have I learned in the meantime? That I, who went to America to convert others, was never converted myself.
Returning to England, John Wesley met a young Moravian pastor, Peter Bowler, and joined a group of people strongly influenced by the Moravians, Protestants from the continent. In London, he went to a meeting in Aldersgate Street, shown on this 18th century plan. He was always to remember the exact day and time. It was May the 24th, 1738, and he set it down in his diary, which he carefully kept throughout his life. Now, near the original site, World Methodism has a memorial in the shape of a flame, on which are Wesley's own words.
I went very unwillingly to a society in Aldersgate Street, where one was reading Luther's preface to the Epistle to the Romans. About 9:15, while he was describing the change which God works in the heart through faith in Christ, I felt my heart strangely warmed. I felt I did trust in Christ, Christ alone for salvation, and an assurance was given me that he had taken away my sins, even mine.
Charles had been through a similar experience a few days earlier and wrote one of his many hymns to celebrate their conversion.
From that time on, John Wesley began his great preaching ministry, much of it in the open air. Here in Epworth, he's standing on his father's tomb. He was often denied the use of church pulpits. At Great St. Mary's, Oxford, he preached on the text, "By grace are ye saved through faith." This message was to spread throughout England and beyond. He went north to Newcastle, where one of the first Methodist buildings was erected. Known as the Orphan House, it became the northern outpost of Methodism. West to Bristol, where the church, still called the New Room, became the western headquarters. Today the statue of John Wesley, ready for the road, stands in front of his old stables. Wesley travelled further west to Gwennap Pit in Cornwall, where he preached to thousands, and where this natural amphitheatre, now neatly terraced, is still used for open-air witness.
Wesley never intended to start a new church. His converts were gathered into societies, meeting locally. In London, the Foundry, shown here, was the meeting place of one of the early societies. Smaller groups met in what were called classes. The members were given tickets each quarter, which they had to show when required. The present ticket of membership has replaced the old class ticket. Later in London, his centre was the City Road Chapel. Her Majesty the Queen reopened the restored building in 1978, the bicentenary of its opening by Wesley. It's regarded as the mother church of world Methodism and is visited by people from all parts of the world.
Wesley was a prolific writer. His journal goes to 8 volumes, his sermons to 4 or more, and there were books or pamphlets on many diverse subjects, such as primitive physic, calm address to our American colonies, free thoughts on public affairs, and a word to a smuggler. Wesley was concerned to spread what has been called scriptural holiness, not only throughout the land, but through every aspect of social life.
There was a lot of opposition to Wesley. It was not uncommon for his meetings to be broken up by unruly rabbles. In the instructions he gave to his helpers, we see why they were called Methodists.
Never be unemployed for a moment. Never be triflingly employed. A preacher of the gospel is the servant of all. Be ashamed of nothing but sin. Be punctual. Do everything exactly at the time. You have nothing to do but to save souls. You will need all the sense you have, and to have all your wits about you.
By the end of his life, there were 70,000 Methodists, and hundreds of chapels had been built. But he still didn't want his movement to be a separate church. He claimed that he lived and died a member of the Church of England. On his deathbed, John Wesley said, "The best of all is, God is with us."
Charles Wesley had died a few years earlier. He didn't travel as much as John, but his hymns ran into thousands. Some of them are among the best known to Christians across the world. He often turned the words of the Bible into hymns. The hymn book for the use of the people called Methodist was a kind of good news Bible for the 18th century. It put the gospel in a form that people could understand. Many of Charles Wesley's hymns have been included in succeeding editions of the Methodist hymn book, and in those of other denominations as well. And these are used not only in church.
Christ is born in Bethlehem.
After Wesley's death, Methodism continued to grow. It was fast becoming a separate church now that the firm hand which had held the reins was gone. A conference, not unlike this one, over which he presided in 1779, replaced Wesley's personal authority. Methodists still shrank from using the name church and called themselves a connection, a linking up of all the societies. Lay people had been encouraged to share in the work, but some felt that the movement was dominated by the ordained ministry, and the Methodist New Connection was formed, which gave greater responsibilities to the lay members of the church. That was in 1797.
Then in Staffordshire a new revival broke out, under the leadership of 2 lay preachers, Hugh Bourne and William Clowes, and Methodism took to the open air again. Here are Methodists in 1957 at Mow Cop, where, 150 years earlier, a great day's prayer meeting resulted in the formation of another group, who called themselves the Primitive Methodists.
In the West Country, yet another group emerged called the Bible Christians. Billy Bray is probably their best-known representative.
The mainline Methodists, Wesleyans as they were now called, continued to grow, influencing the community in many ways. Methodist local preachers were among the Tolpuddle martyrs, and Primitive Methodists were among the early trade union leaders.
Later in the century, a member of the Methodist New Connection felt that he needed to go beyond the rules of his denomination if he was to do the work he felt called to, and William Booth founded the Salvation Army. So the various strands of Methodism continued to grow. Then, in 1907, the Methodist New Connection, the United Methodist Free Church, and the Bible Christians joined to form the United Methodist Church.
In 1932, the Methodist Church, as it exists now, came into being when the United Methodists, the Primitive Methodists, and the Wesleyan Methodists united.
From the Methodist Central Hall, Westminster, there was a procession of witness to Hyde Park and a great uniting conference which opened at the Albert Hall. What had begun as a society of the people called Methodist had become a great church which claims and cherishes its place in the Holy Catholic Church. Methodism, born in song, celebrated its rebirth in a great festival in the Albert Hall in London. Here are Methodists of 1932 singing at that very festival.
The mastermind behind Methodism was John Wesley, and still today the newly appointed President of Conference takes his place in John Wesley's chair. The Methodist Conference is the supreme authority in Methodism, meeting each year in a different town or city. A Bible that belonged to John Wesley is handed on to the new president as a sign that the work begun by John Wesley continues. The ordination in America of Francis Asbury by Dr. Coke reminds us that in John Wesley's lifetime the message of Methodism had been taken to the New World, and in the 19th century all the various sections of Methodism established missionary societies. Methodism had become a world church. In the British Conference there are representatives from many different parts of the world.
Methodism has changed in the course of 2.5 centuries, but the pattern is still the same. The method is still there. In some ways, Methodist ministers and local preachers would still regard themselves as Mr. Wesley's preachers, though they're now directed and authorized by the conference. Churches are still grouped in circuits, as in Wesley's day, when his travelling preachers, as they were called, moved from place to place as his representatives. Each circuit is in the charge of a superintendent. In British Methodism, district chairmen preside over the synods and act as pastors to ministers and people. The local church elects representatives to the circuit meeting. The circuits send their representatives to the district, which in turn sends representatives to conference.
The history of the whole world has been changed by 2 world wars, and the Methodist Church has had to adjust itself to those changes. In Great Britain, people have been moving out from the old areas where the 19th century churches were. New churches have been built to meet the needs of new housing areas.
The Methodist Church looked at its old organisation and, true to its tradition of being methodical, organised 7 divisions. What was the Methodist Missionary Society, earlier described rather patronisingly as foreign missions, has become the overseas division of the Methodist Church. Many of the younger churches have become self-governing, so that partnership is the key word rather than mission. In some situations, ministers from overseas churches are working here alongside their British colleagues. But through its overseas division, the support of British Methodism is still given in many parts of the world. And through the Junior Missionary Association, children are still encouraged to share in the work at home and overseas, and to realise that they belong to a world church.
John Wesley, with all his passion for evangelism, was also anxious to do what he could for poor and underprivileged people. The Home Mission Division carries on this tradition and has many responsibilities. Social work in city centre missions, special help for members of ethnic minorities, and concern about relationships with people of other faiths. Prison chaplaincy and visitation. Industrial mission, including the work of Luton Industrial College and chaplaincy in the 3 services. Work in wide country areas and in the new towns. And at Cliff College, training men and women for lay leadership and mission.
Describing the character of a Methodist, Wesley says, "As he has time, he does good unto all men, unto neighbours, strangers, friends, and enemies." The division of social responsibility takes up this work. Approach is made to our political leaders, putting forward the views of the Methodist Church. Money is raised for the Methodist Relief Fund so that immediate help can be given in emergency situations as they arise. Guidance is given to the Church by the production of reports on all kinds of moral and social issues. Another aspect of the work is the care of older people through the Methodist Homes for the Aged and housing associations.
Wesley complained that some children were sent to school and learned to read and write, but learned all kinds of vice at the same time, and so he resolved to set up a school of his own at Kingswood, Bristol, since removed to Bath. This concern for the welfare of young people has been maintained and extended by the Division of Education and Youth, with a large number of paid or voluntary workers, and through Sunday schools and junior church. Uniformed organisations such as the Girls and Boys Brigade, Guides, Scouts and their junior branches, and the Methodist Association of Youth Clubs. Here are members at one of their London weekends. The Methodist Church also has a number of day schools and boarding schools, and 2 well-established colleges for the training of teachers, at Westminster College, Oxford, and Southlands, Wimbledon. The story of Methodist work among young people would be incomplete without reference to the National Children's Home, which provides family care in community centres, personal advice through Family Network, and which offers a variety of residential care to children in need. The National Children's Home is a big family in Great Britain and overseas.
The Division of Ministries has as one of its special concerns the training of church members, preparation of new members for their confirmation, the encouragement of fellowship groups like Young Wives, Women's Fellowship and Wesley Guilds, the training of local preachers, which involves practical training in the conduct of worship and examinations in the Bible, theology and worship and preaching. One of the most important tasks of the Division of Ministries is the selection of candidates for the ministry to be recommended to the conference. The job of the Methodist minister is not just one job among many others. It's open only to those who believe they are called by God, and this call is tested by the Church through a series of interviews and examinations. Ministers are trained at Wesley College, Bristol. Training is shared with the Church of England at Queen's College, Birmingham, and Wesley House, Cambridge, and with the Baptists in Manchester. The Division of Ministries reaches out to the whole of the Methodist Church, and its services include correspondence courses on a wide range of subjects.
There are about 8,000 Methodist churches in the United Kingdom, and the Property Division gives expert advice and help with building schemes, in the care and maintenance of buildings, and in making grants.
The Methodist Church is a big business, part of God's business, and the Finance Division serves the Church in many ways.
To draw all the threads of this work together, the President's Council meets in between conferences to guide and coordinate all the activities of the 7 divisions.
When people go into a local bank, they don't need to be concerned about the vast organisation that makes it possible to perform simple transactions like cashing cheques and paying them in.
And most people will go into a local Methodist church without realising that there are these great headquarters organisations in London, at Westminster, Muswell Hill and Marylebone Road, and also in Manchester.
The local church exists to exercise the whole ministry of Christ, but it couldn't get far in this work unless ministers, local preachers and Sunday school teachers are trained and new buildings carefully designed. And while they can exercise a local ministry, they can't share in the whole ministry of Christ in the world without the home and overseas divisions.
There's work in the Sunday school or junior church.
There's work among young people.
There are old folk to look after.
There's the family gathering for worship.
We work with other churches, in local councils of churches, in the Free Church Federal Council, and in the British Council of Churches. Modern Methodists, like Wesley, try to be friends of all and the enemies of none.
In small churches there need be very little organisation, but in bigger churches it works something like this.
It begins inside the church. It goes out into the neighbourhood. It goes beyond to the world.
How do you recognise a Methodist? This is what Wesley said.
A Methodist is one who has the love of God shed abroad in his heart by the Holy Ghost given unto him, one who loves the Lord his God with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his mind and with all his strength.
We sometimes think of stewardship as a modern idea, but Wesley went on in his description of a Methodist.
Loving God with all his heart, he serves him with all his strength. He continually presents his soul and body a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God. All the talents he has received, he constantly employs according to his Master's will.
And what do Methodists believe? Fundamentally, what Wesley believed. They accept the main principles of the creeds handed down through the centuries. They follow Martin Luther and the Reformation. The Bible is their authority. They believe that the grace of God in Jesus is offered to all men and women, and those who accept are called to a life of perfect love.
One of the most impressive services of Methodism is the ordination of ministers. These services usually take place during the annual conference in churches in the district. It's an occasion to which ministers will often look back when they were duly ordained by prayer and the imposition of hands of those who share the ministry with them. Deaconesses are ordained in a similar way.
Christian ministry is not confined to those who are ordained. It's shared by all members, and once a year Methodists are invited to join in the covenant service, when they say together the words of the covenant.
I am no longer my own, but yours. Put me to what you will. Rank me with whom you will. Put me to doing. Put me to suffering. Let me be employed for you, or laid aside for you, exalted for you, or brought low for you. Let me be full, let me be empty. Let me have all things, let me have nothing. I freely and wholeheartedly yield all things to your pleasure and disposal.
At the end of each Methodist conference, before the representatives leave to return to their circuits in Cornwall or Coventry, Shetland or Sheffield, or across the seas to mission posts or sister churches in Europe, America or Australia, they sing a hymn.
On his deathbed, Wesley said, "The best of all is, God is with us." And Methodists have found that to be true. If in some future church union the name Methodist should disappear, we believe that the Church of Christ will be richer for the contribution that Methodism brings.
My